In the US right now, there are a number of tax incentives that are out there to help incentivize us to make our homes more energy efficient. So I was curious to try and understand where energy is used in my home and how much goes to different purposes. I'm not able to really get that information on my house easily, but however, I did find data from the US Energy Consumption Survey that was conducted by the Energy Information Administration. And I was pretty surprised by this. So, what you'll see on the screen is a graphic that I'm not showing you the result yet, but there's a couple of categories here: space heating, water heating, air conditioning, refrigeration, and then just everything else, which would be lighting. And so if you think about it, where do you think most of the energy use might be in your home? I live in the South, and I have to admit, I thought air conditioning would be one of the primary uses for energy in my home. And yet, I was pretty surprised to learn that, in fact, heating dominates, and it doesn't matter where you are in the country, heating takes more energy than cooling does. And this data in particular is an aggregate percentage or data from aggregated data on an average household basis. So it is not specific to any region, but for an average US home. Now, they have a lot more data in the survey, breaking it down by region, uh, different types of land uses. But this is the overall data, which is really what I thought was particularly most interesting. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and I'll show you my final graphic that I came up with for this, is to really emphasize this difference between total heating and total cooling, so that the one piece of information I want you to get from seeing this graphic is understanding that difference. So I decided when making this image that I would have this additional um, it's basically a donut chart that goes around my data that shows the total heating, total cooling, and then again, there's everything else. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how I created this. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that when we're doing this in DataGraph, you're creating a graphic that not only is giving you a visual and showing you the data, but it also can be very dynamic. So if I changed, for example, my amount of heating energy for space heating, and that went down by a bit, notice that I just changed that in my table here that I have, which you'll see in a moment. But that changes everything in my graph. So my labels update, my donut charts update, even in my text, the percentages update. So this is one of the advantages of creating a graph like this, or graphics in DataGraph, is that I can easily then replace my data and I don't have to recreate the graphic. It's all very closely connected. So I'm curious if you, as you watch this, if you have an inclination to let me know. What did you think? Did you think heating or cooling was going to be more? Let me know in the comments. Also, if this video is useful, we really appreciate you giving us a like. And what I'm going to do in this video is to go through essentially 5 different steps. We're going to talk about how I set up the background, how do we size the graph, setting up the gradient that you see in the background. Then we're going to get the data, show you how to import that. How to make the donuts will be the third thing we do. Then we're going to add all the labeling. And finally, the last thing we'll do is we'll add the legend. So actually, I'm going to start here by showing us how to get the data and set it up. And I'm showing you now the file that has this. There's a couple of elements I wanted to point out. First of all, there's not only the final graphic, but also an intermediary graph that is summing up the data that I got from EIA. And this is the raw data itself that you see over here in the data table, where we have the average use by type, the category that I assigned, a heating, cooling, and other, and then the values themselves. And then I have this section over here that you'll notice in the data table that is actually a dynamic sum of this data by these categories I added. So again, if I change one of my values in my raw data, everything updates. So this is sort of the beginning of this pipeline that we're going to create to get to our final graph, where I want to show you how I get this data in here and how I created this dynamic summing that's going on in the data table also. Okay, so we're going to do this, and we're going to start in a brand new file that we're going to bring this into. And let me just show you the website that I got this from. I'll put this location in the comments. This is the survey website, and you'll notice that I'm actually using the data from 2015. There is a more up-to-date survey, but that doesn't have yet the data that I used for this. And the specific data that you want to go to is this by end uses. And specifically, if you want to just go ahead and look at this, the first table, the averages that we have here, totals and averages, you can click on that PDF, and that will show you, again, this table that has the data aggregated in all sorts of different ways. But I just want this data right here, these few numbers, the all homes data by these various categories on an average basis. And since I don't like typing in data, what I did was I downloaded the Excel file that you can get right there and brought that into DataGraph. Now, Excel files, you can just right click on them and open them, and it will bring everything into a DataGraph file very quickly. But for this, I decided to use an option that's under the data menu. It's Import Excel File Portion. So go ahead and try that out. Here's this file that's in my downloads folder now. And this gives you a preview of the file as it looks in Excel. Now, it's some of the formatting we have here maybe doesn't exactly reflect the how everything is formatted in Excel, but you can see generally the sheet, and here's these numbers that I want. I can highlight the specific cells that I want to import. A couple of other things to be aware of. Let me go ahead and shrink this so I'm not in the way of it. So I've highlighted, let's do this again. Here's my rows that oh, actually, let me make this bigger because I missed. Here we go. Let me highlight these. Those are the cells that I want. But what I want to make sure that you see, and that I'm not covering up here, is, oh, this is not letting me move it. There we go. Is this in the bottom corners here, the option for use row for titles and transpose. Notice that when I had the data in DataGraph, it's transposed to be lengthwise. So I can go ahead and just click that before I import the data, and I don't have row titles here. That'll kind of mess up the import. So uncheck that, and then when you import the selection, there we go. Now I have my data imported, and I haven't had to type anything. A couple of other things here, I can go ahead and get rid of, there's numbers that were in for footnotes that were in the table. Also, another thing that's in here are dashes where they had the text going to another row within the Excel sheet. I don't want those in here. So a quick way to get rid of those is just to go to the Edit menu, and you can go to the Find and Replace. You can then just hit the dash that you want to find. And what's nice here is it gives you a preview of what the text will look like once it's imported. I'm not replacing this with anything. I'm just getting rid of those dashes. Go ahead and click Change. And that's all set up. So a couple of other things I'm going to do here is add titles onto this, and this is my type of data. Okay, so what I showed you in the final version is how, again, I categorize these types into overall heating, cooling, and other. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and add a text column, and this will be my category. And you can just start by typing in the first row, cooling here, and other. And there's a handy shortcut for this. Now, I guess one sort of difference between DataGraph and a spreadsheet is that DataGraph is really more of a database approach to data. So if you have a category for every row, you have to provide that category to make sure it's assigned properly. So here, instead of having to type them in each row, if I just set the category for the first row that has that value, I can control click or right click on my column, and there's an option for fill empty rows with previous non-empty row. Go ahead and click that. That saves me from having to do more typing or copying and pasting. And now I have my category all set for each row. So the next thing that we did was we had that dynamic summing going on. So to do that, I'm going to use a pivot command. Again, if you're new to DataGraph, I would click on the draw menu. You see a description of all the different commands here, and the pivot is noted as something that can group our data by a category, compute averages, mins, max. It should probably actually say sum there too, because that's what it does often by default. But we're going to go ahead and add that pivot command. I could do it here from this menu, or several of the commands have shortcuts already in the toolbar, so you can add it there. Now, what I like to do is to often pre-select my data before adding the command. And so I'm going to do that here. I can highlight my one column, hold the shift key, highlight both columns, then click the pivot command, and it will automatically sum the data in the numerical column by the category that I had selected. If you open up the pivot command, then it gives you the actual numerical values that it calculated, along with obviously the visual that you see there. And the other thing that we're going to do here is we want to, again, now take this data that was calculated by the pivot. The pivot has both input and it has output. So how do we get this back into the data table? Well, we use these gear menus on the objects themselves. Click that and you'll see now options specific to this pivot command. The one I'm going to use is extract all pivot columns. And there you have it. So now we have the data back in the data table. Again, I may want to customize the headings that are given for these columns. So I have my sum, my category. Another thing that the pivot command does, though, is it will automatically alphabetize the order of the data that's input. I want to have this sorted by my category in the same way that my other data is sorted. So to do that, there is this option for mapping your rows. And if you select that, and in this case, I have a column that already shows the right order. So it says columns, and then we'll pick the category column. And now it's sorted in the way that I want my data to be shown. And again, this is all dynamic. So if I change my space heating, now my sums change, the graphs change, so the input changed and the output is also changing from the pivot command. Let me undo that. There we go. Don't want to change my data. The last thing I'm going to do here is just put these columns into groups, since these are really now two separate tables, and I have my average by my end use, or whatever I want to call this here, and I have my my sum by category. Now in this next part, we're going to create the graph, we're going to size it, and we're going to add that background that you saw with the gradient. So first, to do that, typically when you add a new graph in DataGraph, you will click the button that you see here, and I'll go ahead and show you this. When you do, you see a graphic that has margins around the XY coordinate system. Now that's not what we're going to do here, because we don't want to show any XY coordinate system for this graphic that we're going to create. So instead of that, I want you to go under File, New Graph, and say For Composition. When you do that, you get a graph that does not show the XY coordinate systems. The margins are set to 0. We're not drawing the X and Y. And there is by default a graphic command that's added here. That's if you wanted to compose graphs or bring images in. I'm just going to select that and hit the delete key because I'm not going to use that. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to set the size for this graph. And I often do that as one of the first things if I'm going to design something, so that you really make sure that you're sizing things properly. So the size is here on what we call the canvas settings, set to automatic by default, but go ahead and change this to specified. When you do, it's automatically set to 5 inches by 3 inches. But we want to use, or what I'm using, is the size that is the recommended size for Twitter, since this is something that's going on to Twitter. One thing that's handy is you can use this gear menu right here to create a custom size menu. I have already done that for the size that I want to use, which is 1200 by 675 pixels. So I'm going to select that. But if you haven't done that yet, you can type in 1200, 675. That will give you the dimensions of your graph in pixels. And then you can click this gear menu, and if it's not something that's already there, it lets you add it to the menu. And that menu will be then in all your files. Okay, so 1200 by 675 is a relatively large amount of pixels for your screen. So it's actually bigger than the canvas area that I have for my graph. So you'll want to change the zoom to something smaller, 50%, maybe even sometimes I put it at 25%. But then you'll be able to see the entirety of your graph. Okay, for now, I'll stick with 50%. And again, next thing, let's do the background. I can do that also within my canvas settings. When you open it up, you'll see that there is a background setting for various parts, but we just want just background. We're going to have the same background for the whole thing. You can set it to a solid color or use different gradients. I had the gradient side to side, so I'll select that one. And that gives you another menu where you can select the 3-color gradient. So when you do, you see these 3 different tiles that give you the color on the left, on the right, and in the middle. And notice that when you have a color tile that shows you this slanted line in the middle, that indicates that there's some opacity to the color, so that there's a transparency for the colors to blend. So for example, if I click this, I can change this to an actual color. Now you see that middle color, and I can change the opacity is one way to kind of control the level of blending between them. Also, there is a slider here where you can change how much of the graph is devoted to each color. So I used that, for example, to have a little bit more shown for heating than cooling, a little more red than blue, to kind of emphasize those differences that I was seeing in the data. So for the middle color, I'm just going to use a white with a little bit of opacity, and then my colors here are going to be not they're the opposite of actually what they are. I'm going to have some red on the left-hand side and some blue on the right-hand side, again with some possible level of opacity added to that. Now, one thing to keep in mind with DataGraph is that if you had another graph where you already have the size and the background set up exactly the way that you want, you don't always have to do these from scratch. So for example, I have my file that I started with here, though, that I created here. If I really just wanted to keep these settings to be exactly the same, you can select these objects and copy them, and then go into another file and go ahead and paste. And that now makes my background exactly the same, and the settings now got overwritten from this file into my new file. So hopefully this shows you both how I set it up from scratch, and then one way that you can transfer these settings between graphs and between files. Now let's create the donuts. So this is done using what we call the pie command. So this is for pie charts, donut charts. It's also under the draw menu, so you can see the pie command here. And I often select first the data that I want to make my chart from, and the pie command allows me to then, it'll populate the correct menu with that data. So I've selected that column that has all of the more detailed view of my energy use, and I'm going to say add. So that just creates a simple pie chart, and we're going to add now styling to this. So first of all, how do I get the donut? Well, you'll notice that there are 2 numerical fields here for the size of my pie chart. So I have a slider here where I can change the overall size, but I also have this additional slider where I can change the inner size of this. So that's how you make the donut type of a graphic. And okay, so so next, what do I want to do? Next, let's do the color. So to make the colors, there I expand this out and you'll see that there is a section for the fill color that right now is just discrete colors that are in a row depending on so the first row is space heating. My first color is light blue. So this one is the slice for space heating. And you can add labels onto these, but if you recall in my final version, I just put the percentages. I didn't have a text label on these. So anyway, to make a color scheme, which is what I want to use here, I can say I want the color to come from a column that changes the UI and allows me to select the column that I want to base the color on. And then finally, I haven't created it yet, so it gives me the option of creating a color scheme from scratch. If you've never done this before in DataGraph, once the color scheme is created, you can expand this out. It gets created over here in the variable section. And let me try and stay out of the way of this. I can call this my type color scheme. And there's all sorts of color suggestions that you can get within DataGraph itself. If you wanted, to pick any of these and just see sort of what these look like, you can even reverse them once they're there. So actually these are sort of red, blue type colors. You can also drag these color tiles between these individual rows. So my first one here is air conditioning. I have refrigeration now is white, but maybe I want this blue color for refrigeration. I want my other to be a gray color, for example. So you can sort of play with these colors. Again, you can click and drag these between them, or if you just click the tile itself, it gives you the color picker to choose from those colors. Okay, so that gives me colors now that are associated with heating and cooling that give me sort of the feel of the graph that I want. Now the next thing that I want to do is add a similar color scheme for the category wedge and add that additional wedge. So to do that, I'm going to just go ahead and take this wedge. I don't have to start necessarily from scratch. I can take this and actually, I think I'll just maybe so it's more closer. So you can see this better. I'll do a edit copy, edit paste. You could do Command C, Command V. That gives me another donut that now I can change the values that are being used. So this is going to be the summed values. But in this case, this is going to need to be a much bigger hole in the center to accommodate the one on the inside. And what you'll want is that whatever your size of the inner donut is, which is the sum of the inside and the width, is going to be the value that you see here. So for example, if this is 50 and 50, then my size here is going to have to be 100. And then I can make this whatever width I want that to be. Okay, so my color scheme here, though, I actually don't want to use the same color scheme. Do need to change the color scheme. It's not based on the type here. It's going to be based on the category. And I don't have a color scheme for that one yet. I'm going to also create that color scheme. And then that will show me each of my categories here. And again, I can have my heating be a nice red color. I can have my cooling, maybe I'll have that be a bit of a lighter blue, and my other be a gray scale. So now you see sort of the colors kind of shaping up a bit the way I want, and the how these overlap, how you can see how for example, here's my total heating, and here's the heating by the space heating, and this was water heating. So now, if you recall, let's just look for a moment at the version that I had here. See how these are at a bit of a different angle. So that's what I want to show you next. How do I move these and keep them the same? Because for each individual pie chart, you have this option for start at and it's currently set to the 0 on the axis, on the polar axis. So let's change this to specified, and then that gives me the ability to turn these. And again, I just kind of wanted, for stylistic reasons, I wanted the heating on the left and the cooling on the right. I know the other is there as well. We could make that about a 70 in terms of the angle where that's at. But whatever angle I have that I set that to, I need to do the same for both of them. So they both need to have the same value. And then again, everything lines up. So you can see here's my other and my heating and my cooling. Okay. Next thing I guess I wanted to show you is, I did some colors here that sort of convey roughly the heating versus the cooling kind of red versus blue theme that I wanted. However, I did spend a lot of time in this graphic coming up with color schemes that I was, really happy with, but kind of playing with the colors. So instead of recreating them completely, I can also copy and paste my color schemes from one file to another. So let me show you how to do that. I would just take these with my mouse. You can see how I'm just highlighting these, dragging over to select them. I can then copy them to my clipboard, go into my new file, and then paste them in. So now I have these same exact color schemes here as I did in my other file. And I can go ahead and go into my pie charts and just select the same exact color scheme. So again, hopefully this shows you how you can create these from scratch, but also how once you've created these elements, you can reuse them. And now that I've kind of brought in these color schemes that I created from the original graph, I'm just going to delete the ones that I was playing with there. I'm not using those now. And there I now have my concentric pie charts or donut charts with the colors and approximately the sizes that I want. The only other thing that you'll notice when you look in the final one that I have here on these pie charts is they are labeled for the percentages. And so let me go ahead and also show you how to do that as long as we're kind of working with these commands. So the commands within DataGraph, these pie charts, have a number of ways to add labeling. You can display various aspects. So by default, it says display the name, but the name is something that you select from this menu, and the name currently is set to nothing. So I could display the categories here. Now, notice this font looks very, very small. So one thing I'll say right away is when you're setting the fonts and doing something with this pixel size, I find that setting an overall font of about 36 or so seems to be a good font to work with. And what I'm going to show you is how we then can scale some up and scale some down depending on the specific text element we're working with. So I could have made the choice to show my labels like this. That's an option. I could also have shown the label plus the percent. I don't know, for stylistic reasons, I decided, again, to go with this type of a framework, which really kind of points out the heating versus the cooling. In any case, you have all these different options. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm only going to show the percentage, but I showed it within the bounds of the actual donut itself. And there's a slider here where you can adjust the location of these. It does have a limit on, so you have to get it negative to have these values go into the pie itself. So for here, I did have to just go ahead and type in a number that would go slightly negative on this. But these are maybe a little bigger than I really want for this. So when you go into these commands, you'll see how towards the bottom, there are usually font settings. So for example, here's my font for this particular pie chart. And over on the right-hand side, there's a menu for scaling the font size. I use this all the time when I'm doing graphs like this. So here, I'm going to scale this down maybe 33% compared to the main font that's for the graph. And then actually, I don't need this to be quite as negative as it was. Actually, then negative 50 is probably fine. Well, maybe just a little bit more. And then I can do the same thing for my inner graph. If ever you're confused as to which is which for the command, you can always use the hide, unhide to be certain which one you're using. And again, same thing here, display name. I'm going to just show the percent. I'm going to need to make this somewhat negative, so I'll just type that in, and I'm going to size this down. I think I actually maybe even went down the lowest scaling here to make these percentages be what I want. Now I did also, I guess, use a different font, so I might as well change that here as well. So, so that's pretty much how I did this. I think I need to maybe make this, let's see, I don't like how these numbers are overlapping a little bit. I don't know how well you can see that. I'll just push that out a little bit more, and then that's not overlapping quite so much. Okay. Anyway, that's basically what I wanted to show you, and now we'll move on to the next part. All right, now we're going to start adding our text labels, but there's a couple of things I guess I just did notice I had not quite set yet on the pies the same way I did here. And here you can see how each one of these wedges has a white outline. So just so you can see how to do that, if you go into these commands, there's a line style that you can change. You can change it to a different type or say no line. What I did was change this to white, and the point color by default in my graph is set to white, so I can just go ahead and change that there. I can do the same thing here. I can change this one to white. And in terms of the font sizing, I also was checking back on my original one. I should set the overall size to 32. And one thing that's nice about the relative sizing is that instead of setting all these font sizes independently, I can just change this in one place. And right now I only have one, I just have these one sets of labels. But anyway, you can see how that changes that hopefully a little bit. So let's add more font styling to this. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use text commands. So there is a title option here, but that's really, again, more when you have an XY axis within your graph and you're putting a title above that. Here I have, I'm not doing that. And using text commands is really the most convenient way to add more text labeling to this. I think actually for this part, I will also switch my data with my commands. You can do that under the View menu. You say View Swap Layout. And now you have your list of commands on the left-hand side. This makes it really nice for being able to, see a long list of commands if you end up having that. So let's add one of these elements. You can do that under the Label menu. There's the text command. And when you add that initially, you'll see a text command added in the top left corner of your graphic. And that text label, so here it is right here, is anchored to a specific location in space. So when you're working with the text command, the default settings are to anchor things at a specific location, and then you have an offset in both X and Y that you can use to control the location. So for example, here, this is anchored in the upper left, but I could anchor it to the lower left, and then you see how the text label moves. You can drag these around also and place them where you want, but when you're placing things to get them in an exact location, and for example, in this graphic here, I have this text label and this text label that are specific, that are mirror images on each side of this. So using the offsets really helps you to place things in an exacting way. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So first of all, let's start though with the title and the subtitle. Here I have my text command. Again, I can drag it around, but I want to really anchor it to the right location. So I'm going to anchor this in the upper center. You see you have all these different anchoring locations. So upper center. Now I had dragged it around, so my offset is, I have an offset again in X and offset in Y. I can just set this just so you see what happens if I set it to 0, 0. And let me add in, this is going to be my title. Okay. So a couple of things. First of all, there's one more setting here that's aligning the text relative to this anchor point. It's currently set to left, we want to center this. So now my title is absolutely centered within my figure, and I'm going to want to make my title a little bit bigger. Again, I use these relative sizes all the time with DataGraph. So we'll make this maybe 80% bigger. You can set exact font sizes, by the way, for all of these. You can go in here, specify. There's a way to do it, but I really recommend getting used to using these relative sizes. It makes things a lot easier. Also, then if I want to change my overall font, I can do that in one place and everything will change, the font family. Okay, so I have my title. Now I want to add a subtitle to this. And to do that, instead of starting from scratch, now that I have a text command that's located where I want it, I can go ahead again and take this and copy it and paste it. So now I have another text command. I can drag this down on my screen. You see how that changes the offset that I have right here? So my X offset, I'm going to keep that at 0, but my Y offset will be something, again, to move this down away from the anchor point, which in this case, the anchor point would be right there. Okay, I want to change this to, this is going to be my subtitle. So I'm not going to type in the whole things here, but I just want to show you how I do the placement of these. And this one I'm going to scale down, so I could make it the same size or maybe a little bit smaller. And I think what I did on my final version is I offset the top title a little bit and also the subtitle a little. And again, you can then type in the full title here within these text boxes, or you can double click on these to edit it directly within the graph itself. Now the next two that I'm going to add are on the left and on the right. And I said that I want those to be mirror images of one another. So let's go ahead and just add another one from scratch. And I'll kind of, there we go, drag this down. Actually, maybe I'll move this up so that you can see this a little bit better so I'm not in its way. And on this one, again, go to the anchoring locations and you'll see how there is a center left and center right. So I'm going to click center left. I then have it anchored properly. I can move it to about where I want it. This is going to be a actually 3-line text label. So I'll have my, line 1. I'll have line 2. Actually, I guess I should make sure I explain this too. So over here, you have the ability to add and remove any of these lines. So I just did that sort of quickly. But when I click this plus button, it adds another text line. And this one is going to be my percentages. And let me not do this quite yet, but this will be my percent that I add, and that's going to be dynamic when I get this all set up. And the alignment on this, what you'll see is how it's, again, it's all aligned now to the left. These are all in a straight line to the left. I want this to be centered. So there we go. So now I have my my left side, which again, I made these a bit bigger to really, make emphasize these totals on the left and right. And now to repeat this same thing on the other side, again, I don't need to start from scratch. I can take this, I'll do Command C, Command V. That makes a second one. That don't drag it. I can just, instead of doing center left, I can say center right. And then it's located again, perfectly aligned on either side. So you see how they have the same exact offsets. And if I want to change one of these, so say, for example, this one, I want to be offset exactly 200 pixels from the side and 0 pixels in the Y direction. If I change the offset here, these are really easy themselves to just copy this. So I'll do a Command C, go into this offset, Command V. Maybe that might have been hard to see the difference. Maybe let me do one that's a little bit more distinct. So here I change this one. I can just paste this one in. And again, now they will be mirror images of one another. So that's how I really, again, I do this like this all the time, where I change, maybe change one offset and then copy and paste them between them. So now the next two that I have are the ones that are at the bottom of the graph. These are done very much, again, in the same way. Here, this one, you'll see how it is aligned on the right-hand side. In fact, maybe I can just move this over. Again, we'll swap the layout. So you can see I put all these text commands into their own group just to sort of keep them organized. And you can see how, again, I have all these offsets to be sort of similar. Anyway, I'll let you kind of get used to that and play with that. But what I really want to show you here is how do I make now these dynamic labels within these titles that I'm adding, because that's, again, one of the really great things about making these graphics is that even the labels will update when we change our data. So to do that, what I need to do is use what's called a token. And tokens are, it's almost like a text variable of sorts that I can add into my text labels. So let's do this one here where I want the percentage here. So this is 63% is the number that I want here, and I want it to be dynamic. Again, could I type it in? Sure, I could type in 63%, but then it's not going to be dynamic. There's an emergency vehicle in the background that I hear. Maybe you're hearing it now too. I'm just going to keep going. So to do this, what I need to do is I need to have this percentage in a variable. And earlier, I showed you how I took the data and extracted it from the pivot command to have these these sums within my column. Well, the pie command also has the ability to extract data out, and the data that you extract are the percentages. So from this pie command object, I'm going to click the gear menu, and there's an extract as column percentages. So just go ahead and try that. That's going to make this new column that you can see now over here. I'm going to drag that up into this group so it's grouped with the category data. So now I have the percentages extracted from the pie command, but to use them as a token, they have to be a variable. I have to get them over here into this space that you see here. This is where the variables have to be shown. And to do that, there's a variable type that is a number from column variable. So I go ahead and I add that in, expand it out so that you can really see the options that are here. And then I go pick the column where I want to pull the number from, and then I can pick the index. This is the row number where the value is. And because I very specifically have it heating, cooling, other, I'm going to pick row index number 1. And sure enough, if you look at this number, it will say 63. So this is a variable that I'm going to call heating. Again, I'm not going to start from scratch to create cooling. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to have a new one where I set it at index number 2. It has to have a different name. That's why these have a red dot there indicating that there is an error. So I can, as soon as I give it a different name, now these are variables that I can select. I can go here, open up this. Oh, I guess another thing actually to really note how if I click on any of these text elements, in fact, also any of the elements within my graph at all, it will highlight the command that controls that element. That makes it a lot easier to navigate between the two. So in any case, I clicked this element, it highlighted the text command that controls this text. I can open this up to see my lines of text. And now, instead of having a typed value of 63, let's delete that and use the plus symbol right here to select the variable called heating. Hit that, hit the enter key, and there's the value 63. Now I'm going to type in a percent so that it shows up as 63%. But now this is totally dynamic. So I'm going to, let's change my number here into a different value, make it really small. If I have invested in a great new system for space heating, Um, and you can see now how everything updates. Here's my percentage here. Here's my percentage here. Here's the percentage that I pulled out in the table. And I guess one comment that was something that I was not aware of until we started adding in these pi commands, that the percentages that are calculated by the pi command have a very specific um, logical way that they're calculated in order to make sure that they add up to numbers that make sense. So if you're just calculating a raw percentage from numbers, they may not match exactly the value that you get from the pi command if you're rounding each number individually. But you'll see from this percentages, for example, if I do a quick graph, which if you've never seen this before, this is very handy in DataGraph, I can select this column, hit the space bar, and then that's going to show me some quick summary statistics of my data. And sure enough, these will add up to exactly 100. So they're rounded in a way to so that they make sense when you see those percentages on a pie graph. Okay, so now we have some labels. Again, I'm not going to show you me typing in everything as I did, but hopefully you can see how I created the labels, and again, how I create this dynamic value of my percentage by using a token. And anytime in any of these text fields, if you open them up, when you see these uh, little blue pillboxes, that's what that is. This is something that's connected to a variable, so it's a dynamic piece of text or number. It can also be a number. Now I've added these additional text elements using the techniques that we went over, and the last thing that I want to show you here is how I add my legend. Okay, but before I actually add the legend, let me just do one thing here to kind of make this a little bit easier for you to see everything, because again, now I have this long list of commands, but I can add a command group. I had that in my original file. So to do that, I can, one way is to pre-select all of these commands. I think I'll just select one and show you what happens when I add the group. So here's the group icon that you can click. And this isn't changing the graph at all. This just gives me a way to organize things within my command list. So I can take these elements and I can drag them in. The lower bar here of the group object is also something that is dynamic or draggable, I guess I should say. So I can drag this up or down to add things into this group. Then I can collapse this and just say that this is my text commands. There we go. So anything else that I want to say? Oh, and this is one thing that's handy about this. This is what I used in the beginning when I was showing different elements of the graph initially, and I had hidden some aspects of it, because within the text commands themselves, you can show or hide everything at once that's in that text group. So that's one handy thing with text commands. They also have masks, which we're not using masks in this. That'll be another video. Anyway, so the last thing here, adding the legend. I'm going to do that now using not the default legend command. So to add a legend where we're doing it using a, get out of the way here a little bit, using our color schemes, we're going to need to go ahead and use a custom legend. You can add this using the label drop-down menu. You'll see the custom legend add button. Go ahead and do that. The custom legend is one that you can really just create legends and have a lot of, again, customization over them. But when you create this, what you'll see is this line here, this add line. This shows you all the different things that you can add to your legend. And what we're doing is adding variables. So I'll click the variable button. That gives me a line to add the variable. And the one I'm adding is the one for the type. So I just showed the color for the types in my final version of this graphic. You can see the legend is now on our graph, but not formatted in the way that I want to yet. First of all, the anchoring. We use the anchoring for the text command. Well, the legend also has very similar anchoring. We can anchor this to our lower left corner. I'm going to want this to be a lot wider. I can drag it around on my screen, or well, another part of this that I decided to do was, again, to do multiple columns. So this was convenient because if I do 3 columns, then I get my heating in one column, my cooling in one column, and other is on its own. One thing I did within this, within the color scheme itself, is I added in an extra line so that the other item in this legend would be at the bottom. And I did that just because, well, a couple of other styling things here. We're going to remove the background color, set that to nothing. We're going to change the border to nothing. And it just, I thought it looked nice to have them aligned more on the bottom than having that other up at the top. So by adding this additional line in here, that's what did that. And if you have a, so here actually I just changed it back to the way it was by default so you can see how it was. So again, I just added in a line, and then what I also did was just made the color associated with that completely 100 or 0% opacity actually, so that it doesn't show up as anything in there. Okay, so it was just a little trick that I did to get that formatted the way that I want. I want the font, again, scaled a little bit smaller than everything else. And I want the offset to match the offset that I have for this text command here. So if I open back up my text command list, I click on this text command or this element, right, to bring me to where my offset is for this particular one. I can copy that offset in here and then paste the same exact offset for my legend. And again, that just gives me a way to kind of balance things, make sure that on a pixel by pixel basis, everything is exactly where I want it to be. And that's it. Now I have my legend, and this is pretty much my final graph. So again, what I love about this is if I, really reduce my heating, I can go ahead and change these numbers and everything updates. In fact, this survey was done in 2015. Let me undo that so I keep the original numbers. The survey was done in 2015. So this data is likely to be updated. And when it is, if I create a table like the one I see here, all I'll have to do is just highlight my columns and paste in new data, and everything will be updated. We are in the home stretch. We've come full circle. We've created this graphic from scratch. This is actually the starting point that I showed you. And there's just a couple of elements I wanted to point out in this file. For example, we have some text blocks here. You can add those by clicking this button right here. That will add a text block. That's something that you can drag and move around. There's also a text block here that has the web link to the file that where we got the data in the first place. Again, I'm going to put that in the comments for the video, but if you want that link, or if you want to place links in your own files, just put some text in there that has the HTTPS. I think HTTP also works, and then when you hit return, it will get recognized as a link. So the other really important thing I wanted to do was to show you how to get this image out of DataGraph so that you can share it. That's the reason I made this graphic, is to share on my Twitter handle, which is @PamsData, if you want to check this out. Anyway, so to get this out of here, what I do is I can hover my thumbnail over the, hover my mouse, over the thumbnail, click on this gear menu on the bottom right-hand side and select Export. Okay, now this gives us an option for what format to use. The top ones are all vector graphics. I'm going to here choose a PNG. That's a good format for Twitter. And the bottom resolution is something that you actually have complete control over. If you were doing a retina resolution, you'd see 144 here, but that will double whatever the size is that you specified. And since I specified the exact pixel output I want for my file, I want this to be 72 dpi, which is the standard resolution for the operating system. So I'm going to take this and I'm with these settings and click save. That will output my file, which I conveniently have the folder here where I was placing it. And if you wanted to use the space bar, we can just get a quick preview of this. Yep, here is my file. Looks good. The other thing that you can do is you can get the info from the file to then confirm that it is in fact in the dimensions that you want. So here, sure enough, here are the dimensions that I wanted, 1200 by 675. So I hope that this video was helpful. I think we covered a lot of interesting things, and please, if you don't mind, give us a like. Let us know that this was useful. Subscribe to our channel, and if you do post anything on Twitter or otherwise, our Twitter handle at DataGraph app, you can go ahead and share it with us. We'd love to see what you create.